Welcome to Gems of Motherhood. I'm your host, Sharon Khan. I'm here to connect you with some amazing gems of mothers from all walks of life. Each week you'll hear interviews as well as resources and actionable tips that you can implement in your daily life to be the best gem God has called you to be. Thanks for walking this journey with me today. Please write us a review if you've enjoyed the show. Now let's get into episode 7 with Noline Wakefield.
And I think it's very important as husband and wife is to realize your relationship is priority. It's not the kids. And sometimes we can focus so much on the kids and it's all about them and making them happy and making sure that things are okay, but focus in on your relationship as husband and wife. Kids thrive on it.
This episode is going to make you feel like you just walked out of a marriage retreat. Get your notebook ready as Noline Wakefield shares about how your marriage affects your children. And don't forget to subscribe to the Gems of Motherhood podcast. I met Noline and her husband Neil at Times Square Church. They were part of the pastoral staff as teaching and counseling pastors. They have traveled throughout the United States doing marriage seminars and training up leaders, and they're currently pastoring at Crossroads Church in France. Noline and her husband have 3 children and 17 grandchildren, and this year she and her husband celebrated 47 years of married life. Praise the Lord. Noline, it's so good to have you on the Gems of Motherhood podcast.
Well, it's wonderful to be sharing with you this morning. It's, as you said, we've been married 47 years, and I did something that we have never done in 47 years of marriage. And I let my husband cut my hair.
Oh,
I was so desperate that I have a COVID hairstyle.
You look amazing.
Fortunately, hair grows again. So.
Well, he did a fantastic job. Well, I am so glad to have you speak on this subject. I know we're going to get so many gem nuggets from you. Now, I feel like kids change our lives as parents and as individuals in so many ways, and we begin to make a lot of sacrifices. But marriage also plays an important role in children's lives. So can you tell me a little bit more on how do you think marriage affects children?
Well, I'd like to just read a scripture to you from the book of Malachi, and that's the very last book in the Old Testament. And I think this is what the heart of God is for families. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "But did he not make them one, having a remnant of the Spirit? And why one? He seeks godly offspring. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously with the wife of your youth." And I think that's what God intended in marriage, as he wanted us to become one, husband and wife, because he was seeking godly offspring. And you can just see how important this relationship is to God, is because 5 times in the Bible it talks about God taking us and making us one. And that's, you can find in Genesis, in Malachi, in Matthew, in Mark, and in Ephesians. See, God wants us to be one because he is seeking godly offspring. And, you'll find that in a marriage, Satan will always try and divide the two of you. And instead of you being one, he wants you to become 2 singles once again, and in a sense to be living as married singles. But where there's unity, and I believe unity starts with husband and wife. We want unity in the churches, in our country, but it needs to start with husband and wife. And when there's unity in that relationship, there God commands the blessing. And I know we've done a lot of things wrong in our home and in our marriage, and lots of ups and downs. But tell you, when you concentrate on your one flesh relationships, it's like your kids see a stability there. Like, I remember our son was going through a really difficult time. He got involved with the wrong crowd. He was experimenting with drugs, and it was just a very difficult time for us. One thing it did do, it did improve our prayer times a lot. But it's one thing that God showed us in prayer is you concentrate on your relationship together. And then when Derek's life is going up and down, when he looks at you, he'll see a stability. And that stability of your one flesh relationship will see him through all the hard times that he's going through. And I tell you, we made a lot of mistakes. We were far from perfect, but we invested in our one flesh relationship. I remember driving in the car the one time, and our daughter's sitting in the back, and she's reading this book, and it's called 10 Mistakes That Parents Make with Children.
Your daughter is reading that book. Wow.
She's reading that. She said, "Aha, here's another one that you've made." But you know what? Today, all of our children and grandchildren love and serve God, and I thank God for that. And,
that's good.
Let me just say this to you, especially for maybe some of those who will watch this at a later time. Even if you felt you married the wrong person, God can still take the two of you and make you one flesh and give you a good marriage if you allow him the opportunity to do so. You see, in Matthew chapter 19, it says that when we choose marriage, God takes us and makes two one flesh. He does the joining. We may have done the choosing, but God does the joining. And he makes us one flesh. So no marriage is impossible. So, don't give up on your marriage.
That's some really, really good points there. When you mention about how your son, mixed with the wrong crowd, and it just drew you both much more closer to God in prayer, was there even a time where you felt discouraged and obviously you had to keep going and keep running the race and be strong for your children? Can you share a little bit more of your experience in that aspect as a unit of one?
I think with my husband and I, we did a lot of talking and a lot of praying together, and we stood strong together. I mean, there were lots of times where we felt a lot of despair and didn't know where to turn, but always in prayer, it's like God just gives you that peace. And so we spent a lot of time in prayer. And I just remember riding in the car the one day, and that verse in Isaiah came up about, how that the rain falls on the ground, and whatever in the ground, those seeds spring up. And it was like God was showing us what was deep in our son's heart. As we were praying for him, it was like that rain was coming down, and God was allowing what was in his heart to come up. And we could see the seeds of rebellion. We could see what was going on in him. And it gave us the opportunity then to through prayer and talking with him and that, to pull those weeds out. But it was like God allowed that to come up so we could deal with it, in the home.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know you also pointed out that even if you think that you pick the wrong spouse, God always join it. Now, sometimes, we deal with our human flesh. How do you suppose that's going to work? Obviously, God is going to work it out. But what if the other person doesn't want to work it out?
Well, again, I think there's scriptures that say that if the unbelieving spouse is happy to stay in the relationship, you stay in that relationship and you pray for them and believe God for them. But I think too that you are only responsible for yourself. And I think you do what you can. There obviously must have been something that attracted you to your spouse in the beginning. And I think sometimes after marriage, we can start looking at the faults instead of seeing, well, what really attracted me to my spouse in the beginning? And I think if you go back to focusing in on, this is what I like about my spouse. And, scripture tells us too that this is where a lot of the warfare goes on, is in our mind. And the enemy will always try and plant seed in your mind about your spouse. Look what they're doing. And, our job then is to pull those thoughts down and to concentrate on what is good, what do I like about my spouse, and start praying for them and believing God for them. And, just realizing, like I said, God can take two and genuinely make them one. The breakup, what is the number one breakup in marriage? What do you think?
Finance and affair?
Yeah. Well, the number one breakup in all marriage is selfishness.
And that is so true.
Yeah. And, I think what it is too is, like Time Magazine said this, early love is when you love the way another person makes you feel. Mature love is when you love the person as he or she is. And you see, we often get married to fulfill our own needs, but real love is to make somebody else happy. And so when you think about a marriage relationship, there's no I in the word team.
Right.
And we need to see ourselves as that we are a team together. The strengths that he has is what I need, but the strengths that I have is what he needs.
That's amazing. Now, I know that in some families, after having children, we tend to put a lot of focus on the children, and sometimes we forget about our unit as a marriage. What would you advise, or what would you suggest for a healthy marriage?
Well, again, I think, you go through different seasons in a marriage, and especially like when you have a young child. It's a season that you go through, and so there's needs that are there, and I think to be sensitive to one another. And, it's a very tiring time for a young mother, getting up at night and lack of sleep. And then I think there needs to be just that sensitivity as to what is going on. But I think an important part is for communication to happen between a husband and wife, where she can say, this is what I'm going through. I'm feeling very tired at the moment. But I think some husbands can feel very neglected, and that the wife loves the kid more than they love him. And there can even be jealousy because of that. So I think communication is very important in that very early stage. And then again, to see that as husband and wife, we have different roles in the relationship. And in this season of life, the mother role is very important when the kid is still little. It's that nurturing, it's that kind of unconditional love that they have, that the kid really feels. And a husband, in a sense, has very little to do with a child when they're babies. But then for you to recognize that as that child gets bigger, they really need the father's influence in their lives. And that's why God has created a husband and a wife relationship. You have the unconditional love, but the father's role now is to bring that child into maturity. And when we recognize that that is what the father does, and give them the rein to be able to make some of the hard decisions and to bring that child to maturity. Again, I remember when our kids were growing up, and we had one of the biggest fights was when our son, he had just come out of Army Reserves. He had gone to the Army Reserves to get money for university and so on. And he had finished with Army Reserves. And he came home, and it was a couple of weeks before university started. So he was at home. He was lounging at home. He didn't want to do anything. And I remember Neil coming home and saying to Derek, I'm not going to let you just sit around at home and visit with your friends. You need to get out, get a job. You need to pay us rent. And if not, you need to leave our house. But I want you to get a job, or else I'm kicking you out. And you need to pay rent. And I remember going to him and saying, how can you kick our son out? He can't get a job right now. You've got to have that unconditional love. And what if he goes to his friends and he gets involved in drugs and he does this and this and this? You can't kick him out. But the very next day, our son went out. He actually got 2 jobs, and he started paying us rent. And eventually we just saved that money for him and helped him buy a car. But it was, you see, I wanted him just to make things nice for him.
Right.
Let him be at home. He's going to be at university. Don't put any pressure on him. But you see, the role of the father was to bring him to maturity, to say, son, you need to get a job. You need to go out and work. And again, I think it's very important as husband and wife is to realize your relationship is priority. It's not the kids. And sometimes we can focus so much on the kids and it's all about them and making them happy and making sure that things are okay. But focus in on your relationship as husband and wife. Kids thrive on it.
I love that example you just gave, because I think every household face that situation whereby, should I kick my son or daughter out because they're not paying rent and they're not getting a job? They're just lazing around the couch. And, most moms are like, no, we gotta take care of them. We're like Mama Lion trying to protect our kids, right? But I love that example that you just gave, which is so true, where the father is the one whereby he would try to set them in place. And as you were saying, towards the end about how we have to put marriage first, what happens when you place parenting before marriage?
Well, I think you've got to realize that children are huge imitators of what you do, and you can't say to your kids, do what I say, but not what I do.
Right.
Because they're imitators. And the very first people that they come into contact with is you and your husband. And so you need to model for them how you want them to be when they are adults. Like if you respect authority, your kids will expect authority. I remember our kids coming home from school the one day and just swearing. And, we said, well, where did you hear this from? Well, they heard it at school. And we said, well, if you hear us using those words at home, you can use them. But if you don't hear it, you're not allowed to use it. So, you model for them what you want them to turn out. And I think as a mother and a father, they watch you. And so I think it's very important that you show affection to your spouse, even if it's uncomfortable to you and you didn't grow up with that. Like my parents, for instance, they always held hands. I always saw them hugging each other and giving each other a kiss. Yeah. And as a child, it gives you so much security. And your kids need to see that too. They need to see a lot of hugging and you just showing affection one to another. As they get older, they might just go, oh, sis, and I don't like that. But, deep down, your kids love you to show affection one to another. And I think when you have kids, you've got to have a date night wherever possible.
Right.
Make your relationship a priority. If you build your whole life around kids were made to leave home. That's why they're called offspring. They spring with you. So you don't want to build your whole life around the kids. And your job is not to be friends with them. Your job is to parent them. There'll come a time when the parenting will stop and you will become a good friend with them. But when they're in your house, you are parenting them. And so you make good decisions for them. But, have a date night wherever possible. As lovely and as magical as your offspring are, the incessant demands can make you focusing on your spouse feel like a luxury. But it's the reality of many parents, especially moms, that the care of children leaves no energy, time, or even desire to invest in their marriage. So the fix for that is a good old date night. And it's going to require effort to remain friends, to remain lovers, to be connected with your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I always tell people that, when you're dating, it's work. When you're married, it's hard work. When you have children, it's even harder work because, like you said before, the enemy always tries to separate a marriage, and we have to work hard in order to keep that unity. And if one of us slack off, then it may hurt the marriage a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it does take effort, but it's so worth it.
Right.
And again, when you have your mindset that my spouse is my priority, you take the time to listen to what your spouse is saying. Don't always be on your iPhone checking, Facebook or checking all these things. It's very sad to see how families are becoming, we went to dinner. This was back when we lived in Florida, and there was this family of 4 sitting at a table. They were in each other's company physically, but every one of them had their iPhones on. There was no communication back and forth.
Right.
And I think it's important as families to at least have one meal together around the dining room table where no iPhones, and where you just spend that time talking with one another, speaking
Completely
to one
agree.
another, investing in one another.
Absolutely. That I completely agree with that. Now, I guess it leads to this question then, how much does it hurt a child when there is a conflict in marriage? And what if it was just a small bickering, and let's just say you're in a small New York City apartment. There's really no space for you to go into another room to bicker. What do you do?
I think it's important that you have some ground rules. It's very important that you don't tear each other apart. See, we don't fight as Christians, but we have intense fellowship.
I love that word, intense fellowship.
Yeah. So in your times of intense fellowship, never make it where your child has to pick sides. But it can be a very good learning tool for your kids to realize you do have disagreements, but you can compromise, you can work it out. And so establish some good fighting ground rules, like there's not going to be any shouting. We're not going to walk away from each other. There's going to be no name calling. And I think it's important that both of you agree to these terms to say, listen, I don't want our children to grow up in an environment where we always at each other, but we can disagree and we can do it in a calm way and talk about things, without raising our voices. And I'm sure people are finding out during this lockdown that it's very easy to take our frustrations out on one another. Your spouse is right there and had a bad day at work, and so we take it out on each other. But it's one thing that Neil and I did in our marriage too, is we made that agreement, is that we would talk about what was really bothering us. We bring it to the surface, because sometimes if we're frustrated, we take it out on each other. So we'd say, let's not take this out on our one flesh. We want to invest in our one flesh. So let's talk about it. What is really bothering you? What is behind your anger or what's going on in you? And so we'd be able to talk about it and pray about it together. And I think when you do this, you can reinforce the concept of that unconditional love by showing that you can argue and still be okay with one another. So that even when your children get married, they think, well, it's okay, we can have disagreements. Right. But we can work it out. It doesn't mean to say that it's the end of the relationship.
That's awesome. That's some really great gem nuggets there. We're almost towards the end of the show, but I wanted to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to share with other gems of mothers out there?
Yeah. Okay. So let me just say, I think this is very important for women to know this, especially mothers. And it's this statement: bad moments don't make bad mamas. So you're going to have those moments where you really think that you failed, that it's no good. But remember, you'll have those bad moments. It doesn't mean to say that you're a bad mama.
I love that.
Again, invest in your relationship. Make your spouse the priority. And the dividends, by the way, are great. And then I just want to close by reading this. It says, how to be a mean mother. It says, a mean mother never allows candy or sweets to take the place of a well-balanced meal. A mean mother insists on knowing where her children are at all times, who their friends are and what they do. A mean mother breaks the child labor law by making her children work, washing dishes, making beds, learning to cook, and doing other cruel and unpleasant chores. A mean mother makes life miserable for her offspring by insisting that they always tell the truth. A mean mother produces teenagers who are wiser and more sensible. A mean mother can smile with secret delight and pride when she hears her only grandchildren call their parents mean. What the world needs now are more mean mothers and fathers.
That's great. I think we are all mean mothers then. Well, thank you so much, Noline, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me too.
Yes.
God bless you.
God bless you too. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gems of Motherhood podcast. If you're wanting to connect more with some amazing gems of mothers and more resources, head over to gemsofmotherhood.com where you can subscribe to the show. That's where you'll find show notes with actionable tips and any links mentioned by our guest. Most importantly, I hope you will find inspiration and learn to cultivate your own journey. You are loved. You're an incredible gem to God. He knows you intimately, He knows what you're going through, and He knows what you need. Remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made in Him. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.